G'day and welcome back to the garage. In the last episode of the RM250 build, the swing arm was restored and fitted with new bearings and eventually fitted to the bike. In this episode, the rear suspension will be completed with the linkages and rear shock being rebuilt and fitted. Let's get started. So just like the rest of the bike, the rear shock absorber was dirty, oily and in need of some work. And the first step in the disassembly is to remove the rear spring. With the spring removed, we can get a good look at the shock, and it's not pretty. It looks like it has a leaking seal, and that bump stop will need to be replaced. Next, I release the nitrogen gas from the reservoir, and then back off the compression and rebound adjusters. And then the valve is completely removed to make sure there's no pressure inside. This cap is a pressed fit, so with the help of a punch and a hammer, it is simply tapped out of the body, which then exposes the seal head. With no pressure in the reservoir, the cap can be pushed down to expose the circlip. And once the clip is removed, the cap and bladder can also be pulled out of the shock. To remove the seal head, I needed a seal head driver, so I decided to sketch one up and make it off camera. This tool allows the seal head to be driven down inside the shock body and expose the circlip. Just like the reservoir cap and bladder, once the clip is removed, the assembly can be pulled out of the shock. This is the valve stack, and it's held onto the shaft with the lock nut that needs to have the locking function ground flat to enable removal. And with the nut removed, the valve assembly can be carefully transferred to a bolt and contained by two large washers. There's a lot of small parts in this assembly, and they all need to go back in the same order, so this is a good way to prevent any mistakes. With the valve stack removed, the rest of the shock can be disassembled, with the seal head, shock body cap, and bump stop seat all removed from the shaft. I gave the shock body a really thorough clean, but no matter what I did, I couldn't match the finish of the hydro blasted parts on the bike. So I sent it away to be blasted. That way it will match the finish of the rest of the parts on the bike. And while I was waiting for the shock body to return, the parts to be reused were cleaned up, repaired, and zinc plated where required. The last pieces of the rear suspension are the linkages, which were hydro blasted a while back. New bearings were installed with the use of the shop press. After thoroughly greasing the new bearings, new seals were fitted and the linkages were assembled and then fitted to the bike. The last part to be restored is the spring. But first the original paint needed to be removed. And rather than try and blast it away with my small sandblaster, the majority was removed with paint stripper. And after a quick sandblast, the spring was ready for a coat of new yellow paint. Just as expected, the shock body looks great, and I was really glad I made the decision to get it done. After a new bearing was pressed in, the reassembly could begin. I couldn't find an original bump stop, but this one from a Honda RM250 has the same inner and outer dimensions, and it fits perfectly. Before the seal head could be installed, I needed to make up a seal bullet. This was done off camera, and it made installing the seal head without damage really easy. After tightening the nut to the correct torque, I add a couple of punch marks between the nut and the shaft, just to ensure it doesn't undo in service. It's important to make sure there's no air in the system. The first step is to ensure there's flow between the reservoir and the shock body. And once there is, the bladder and cap can be installed, making sure that oil flows out so there's no air trapped in the reservoir. A small amount of air is added to the bladder, which seats the cap against the clip. Then the shock body is filled with oil as the assembly is fitted. It's pushed in and out to help any air escape. Finally, the seal head is pushed into the body, again with oil overflowing. With no air in the system, the seal head can't be pushed in all of the way. So, air is released from the bladder, which provides room inside the shock body for the seal head to be fitted. And once the cap is tapped back into place, the air valve is reinstalled, and that's the assembly of the shock complete. At this point that the shock was taken to the local bike shop, where about 145 psi of nitrogen was added to the bladder. Finally, with the spring installed, we have one refurbished shock ready for installation. With the front and rear suspension now complete, keep an eye out for the next episode of the RM250 build. Thanks for watching, see you next time.